Press the right button, it came on. Welcome everybody to our packed out meeting this evening. I think there's more guests than there is attendees, but we'll start anyway. Apologies, we have a few. Councillor Clark replaced by Councillor Whitcroft. Councillor Crawshaw replaced by Councillor Rose. I was going to say Councillor Knight replaced by Councillor Mason, but Councillor Mason's not here yet. But
It'll be coming after work.
All right, because I did say he was this afternoon. He was coming, so, yeah. Councillor Nelson on parental leave. Councillor Wilson replaced by Councillor Melly on away from work. Not walk as fast as you, does she? And we've also apologies from Councillor Webb, Councillor Kilbane, Councillor Pavlovich and Councillor Stills-Warshaw. So we can criticise the executive as much as we like and they can't respond. So we can have a field day. Any other apologies? I guess not. Any declarations of interest? Oh, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to the items on my formal register of interest, which can be obtained through the internet, I should declare an interest, which is not technically an interest at this point in time, but I have been asked to be a director of a charity which cares for disabled and children with special needs. And although the technicalities have yet to be completed, I'm on the company's house register, and that is York Inspirational Kids.
Minutes of the last meeting. We have one slight tweak that the minutes, item 9, we resolve the minutes of the meetings of the committee held on the 2nd of July and the 7th of May be approved and signed as a correct record. Are we happy with those?
Yeah.
Go. Public participation. We have one. Flick, are you there?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, Flick. If you would like to start now, is it 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Yep, 3 minutes. Away you go, Flick.
Thank you. School attendance. Worryingly, the new government seems obsessed with presenteeism, just like the last. Firstly, this is fundamentally ableist. Just trying being a parent of a disabled child, being told to schedule all medical appointments outside of school hours. It's an impossibility given supply and demand. And of course, the more and complex healthcare you need to access for your child, the more the burden on parents becomes disproportionate and discriminatory. And then we come to illness absence itself. There is more to learning than being physically present. What learning is taking place when the child feels too unwell to be there? This obsession with prizes for 100% attendance damages those children for whom achieving it is an impossibility. It just damages their feelings of self-worth and leads to internalized depression that so many disabled people have to contend with as adults. That's the basics, but I feel like I should have registered under the name Cassandra for the next part. Yes, safeguarding is important, but tell me, how did child protection turn into constant exposure to a level 3 airborne pathogen? Children being required to attend school whilst COVID positive because there are first aiders to help them get through the day is a dystopian nightmare if your child is clinically vulnerable owing to pre-existing conditions or returns to a household where there are other clinically vulnerable members. The dramatic rise in the numbers of parents homeschooling is testimony to the fact that they feel school is failing them and their children. The number of children with long COVID is rising rapidly, somewhat unsurprisingly, despite the myth that children are unaffected by it. A mountain of research now makes it crystal clear that every single infection causes physiological damage and the incidence of continuing symptoms rises with every repeat infection. It's terrifying to me that teenagers are now being diagnosed with dementia. Cognitive decline after repeat infections is also being recorded en masse. What long-term future for children getting sick with it several times a year throughout their whole school career? This is not sustainable from a staffing perspective either, many taking early retirement to avoid the hazard of being in school, many being medically retired with long COVID and losing their cherished careers, and for what? Evidence shows that schools are the driver of transmission for every single wave of this disease. We know what the solutions are. Stay home when sick, isolate when infected, and clean the air in schools to prevent spread. For those who say, oh, but there's no money to do that, there is always money. It's political choice. Perhaps we could spend less on the military-industrial complex. The amount spent on supply teachers covering sickness absence last year equates to £171 per child, enough for HEPA filters in every single classroom in the country. Because our children are our future, and with the current policies in place, we simply won't have one. Thank you.
Thanks, Flick. You made some good points, and we'll take them into account later. Okay, finance and performance. Richard. It's like 2 minutes since you was here last.
I think it was at the last meeting, wasn't it? We did the outturn for 23-24. So we moved swiftly on to the first monitor for 24-25. So again, in the usual format of these finance performance monitors, you have an extract of the report that's already been considered by the executive that looks at the full council budget and performance position. And the first couple of pages on page 9 and 10 and 11 summarise the overall council position. On the finance side of things, and the table at page 11, paragraph 12, summarises the overall council's position that we're forecasting at Monitor 1 of about a £3.4 million projected overspend for the year. And clearly that is still a significant projected overspend compared to the previous financial year. At that point in time, I think the figure was over £11 million, I think about 11.4 million at that same time in 23-24. The rest of the finance part of the report then looks in a little bit more detail at the budgets covered by the Scrutiny Committee. So again, page 12 of the table at paragraph 13 sets out in a little bit more detail the budgets within the Children Education Directorate and what we're projecting at Monitor 1 in terms of those, and also the element of culture and communities that's also covered by this Scrutiny Committee as well. So within children education, we're projecting about a just over £1.3 million overspend for the year. And again, I don't want to sound too pleased about that, but that is a significant change from what we were reporting at this time last year, which I think was in excess of £5 million. Members who were on the committee at that point will recall. So that is a big improvement in terms of the position that we're reporting. I think it was even bigger the year before. I think it was over £7 towards £8 million in the previous year. So there's been a continuous improvement in the financial projections within children and education that are reflected in these projections today. The main areas within that are still, I think, we're reflecting in there within children's safeguarding, in children's social care, where the main variances are. There's more detail in the narrative, which I'm sure colleagues will wish to ask questions on. And then the latter part of the report moves on to the performance and performance indicators that are relevant to the committee. I think we don't have any colleagues from business intelligence here at the meeting. But I think one of the things they did want me to say was that because this is the first monitor of the year, some of the indicators will not be released yet. So some of them done on a quarterly basis, and I think some of this information may well have been prepared before the end of that quarter on some of these, which might explain why some of them are not as up to date as you might have expected. But I'll stop there and open up for questions and comments.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to know that the excess expenditure is being pulled back and we're in a better looking financial position. Interested in paragraph 20 on page 13 and the need to appoint a number of agency staff. Now, I know that the directorate has been very successful in reducing the number of agency staff employed, but it looks as if we're back in the situation where we need them. And I suppose my question is, have we got the numbers under control? And although it says a predicted overspend of 52k, that seems like a bit low for more than one or 1.5 members of agency staff. And I just wondered if you care to comment on that, whether that's Richard or Martin on that one.
I mean, I can comment on the financial aspects of it. I'm sure Martin will want to comment on the staffing issues around that. Yeah, I think in terms of the projected overspend, I'm assuming that that's because we're only assuming we're going to be needing these staff for a small portion of the year. So it won't be for the full year. It will be for a part of the year that projection has been included. Is why we get down to the 52,000. I think that's correct.
Okay. So to follow that up, is there an expectation that that number of staff will continue into the following year?
Don't think so, but Martin will confirm.
No, I certainly hope not. So I think you're right to say we've absolutely got a grip of agency staff from where we were. So certainly 2 years ago in social care, we had 46 agency staff. As of Friday of this week in social care, we've got none, which is against anything that's happening in the country, either regionally or nationally, which is a fantastic position to be in. I think in SEND, things are very challenging, both in terms of demand, but also in terms of we've just had some movement within the team, and that's just about, we're a very small local authority, and when you do have 1 or 2 people that just fall off the edge, it's very difficult to respond quickly in the same way as perhaps larger authorities can. So we'll always see an element of some spend. What we have done is make sure that we're absolutely in control of it.
Could I follow that up by asking, are we hoping that the agency staff that we've got on the books at the moment then will fall off the edge into permanent employment?
So yeah, we're certainly out to recruitment and certainly starting to see signs of the team across SEND going in the direction that we need to be. But it is challenging, and I guess I'd re-emphasise the fact that it's not maybe just about it's not just about vacancies arising. It's the fact that demand is increasing substantially year on year, and we haven't necessarily increased the team. The second part of that paragraph, or the second paragraph to that, mentions the education psychology team, and the difficulty within SEND. You've got a statutory duty to produce an assessment. Where there needs to be one, we can't put it aside in a desk and say, actually, we'll come back to that one because we haven't got the member of staff to deliver it. So in answer to your question, we aim to be there, and we're certainly, we've got a grip on it in a way that we've never had before.
Councillor Wick.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Richard, for a very well written report. I'd also like to echo the remarks that it's fantastic news that the overspend is being reined back in, and testament to all the hard work of council officers for doing that. So thank you. Specifically talking about page 12 and point 14, it states that the number of children looked after at the moment in York has been at a consistently high level, and the budget has been built to accommodate. Is that just for this year, or when it says consistent, does it mean that over the course of several years that the budget has not been high enough? And if that's the case, has there been any sort of adjustments or estimations we can make, change our estimation levels perhaps?
Yeah, that's good point to raise. Yeah, so we are talking about over a period of time that the budget, the number of looked after children has increased in excess of what the budget was designed to support. I mean, the original budget was designed to support round about 200 children. There has been elements of growth put in budgets over the last few years, and incrementally that growth has been increasing. And you'll see at the end of that paragraph, there was another £1.6 million worth of growth put into children's social care within the 24-25 budget to help address some of that issue. Some of that 1.6 million will be needed to just deal with general inflationary pressures. So the costs of the placements will rise anyway because salaries of people who are supporting these children will go up. But a chunk of that is to start to gradually address that pressure.
I think just to add, I think again it's an area that we've got some grip on as well. Again, in terms of of the data. I think 2 years ago we had somewhere around 286 looked after children, which included 300 covenant asylum seeking children, which is young people that we get some funding from through government. We're now down, as of this week, I believe, to 222 looked after children, of which 16 are unaccompanied asylum seekers. So actually, if you take the unaccompanied asylum seekers away from those numbers, because they're being paid for separately by national government, we're getting much closer to what the budget is funding, which again is superb compared to what's happening nationally.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up that point around unaccompanied asylum seekers as well. Is it possible to have the breakdown of that, just to understand sort of how many, if it could be emailed to members of the committee, just to understand how many there are specifically and how that affects the sums? That'd be useful. Thank you.
No follow-ups. Did you want your follow-up now? Yeah. So, okay. So we've got Councillor Melly, Councillor Rose, Councillor Cuthberts and Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about the home to school transport budget, please, because I think we've been told recently that officers have managed to find ways to use that budget more efficiently, maybe relying less on private hire vehicles and that sort of thing. But then it says in the report that there's nearly £750,000 allocated for growth in that area. So I was just wondering if you could tell us more about that, please.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, that's, I think, referring to paragraph 18, aren't you, where we've talked about the level of growth. So there's been growth allocated to the service to deal with some historic issues within that budget. So similar to what we were just talking about around the children's social care budgets. So I think over a number of years, over-optimistic saving assumptions were made and budgets were reduced within home to school transport. We're now at the point where those historic overestimated savings elements have been removed, basically by having the growth added back in again. And then the remainder of the gap within that, because it was overspending significantly in the past, has been achieved by the service then implementing more efficient and more economical ways of delivering the transport needs of those children. So it's a combination of the two, similar to what Martin was saying within children's social care, except we've got there a little bit faster on the transport one at that moment, at this point, because the overspends were of a much lower scale. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but yeah, a big chunk of the growth that goes in the transport in the last couple of years has been to deal with inflationary pressures as well, you know, particularly around fuel and staffing costs. But yeah, that's pleasing now to see that that's on a relatively even keel. We just need to be slightly cautious because we're doing this projection at quarter one, or just a little bit before quarter one, and we don't always know the full implication of the transport cost for the new academic year until a few weeks into the year. That doesn't always settle down. It's not always as easy to predict what transport needs are going to be until a few weeks into the academic year. So we'll get a clearer picture of that at the next monitor when we bring that up. But I'm not expecting it to change significantly from that position. But it may well be a little bit different just because of that issue.
I've got a follow-up to that. So the last meeting, it was 620,000. And this meeting, it's 730,000. So it's quite I know Labour's in, but it's quite an inflation leap for 110,000. Is there a reason why it's gone from 620 at the last meeting to 730 this one?
So I think the 620 you're referring to was the projected overspend, or the actual overspend at the end of 23-24 against the budget. So that was the actual overspend that we had. So the gap between actual expenditure and the budget was the 600,000.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is the growth that's then been added to the budget for 24-25. And a chunk of that is to take account, some of that is to take account of that in overspend pressure that was there. So some of it is to eliminate that 600,000 by increasing the budget so that we don't replicate the 600,000 overspend. The remainder of that 600,000 has been dealt with by the team coming up with more efficient ways of actually delivering the transport. And then some of the 730,000 will have been used to bolster the budget for expected inflationary pressures. The contract renewal dates on a lot of the transport contracts is the start of the academic year, 1st of September. So those contract costs will increase on the 1st of September as well, generally by various factors within the RPI index. So some of it's to do all of those three things, if that makes sense.
So you now think 730 is about right?
Well, 730 was the amount of growth that the council allocated to the budget for 24-25. So that's the extra resource, the extra budget that's gone in for 24-25. And we believe that that's enough to cover the inflation, the new inflationary pressures for 24-25. Some of the historic overspends, particularly around the savings that were over ambitious, and then to deal with the underlying pressure that was there. So we believe that's enough to do all of that this year, and that's why we're projecting. If you look on the table, the school transport budget is within the education and skills line, and we're not really projecting any particular variance on that budget at this stage of the year. So we're expecting that 730,000 of growth, plus all of the other work that's been done, to be sufficient to bring that budget into line by the end of the year.
So it's a good guess now.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm behaving myself with the supplementaries. So I've actually got a question about the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children numbers, which you've, to paraphrase paragraph 38 on page 17. Basically, we've got about 19 children in care who are UASC at the moment, but nationally we've been told that if it's not 34 or higher, there's I'd say good chance that we're probably going to bring more into the city. Is that an accurate reading of that paragraph?
Yeah, so as part of the national transfer scheme, which has now been in place, I think probably for 5 or 6 years, we're expected to take up to 0.01% of our child population, which for York is 34 children. So we could take, under the national transfer scheme, we would take up to that amount. And we're a part of a regional rota across the 15 local authorities across the Yorkshire and Humber. So we take young people on the basis of when it's our turn. The number that we have at any one point will depend on whether they're still a child when we get the next ones in, if you like. Some will age out. So we've also got a number of young people who are care leavers who have come in as a child. They're now an asylum-seeking adult. So I don't expect this. I don't expect anything to change dramatically in terms of those numbers going up, but they'll certainly stay around that number, I think, for a while.
Okay, thank you. Because yeah, I guess anything below 34, about half that number, means that, you know, obviously we can transfer it, but it'll depend on what's there at the time. Two other kind of broader, bigger points, I guess. Number one is there's a lot of positive in here. I think the improvement to only having a 1 million and a bit gap is definitely notable. And out of, you know, over 200 million of spend, that, you know, it's a lot lower than the 5% it looks like on the paper. But obviously that's still a sizable gap. That's still something we need to close financially as a council. The two questions are, on the good side, most of the kind of absolute figures have improved across all the performance. I guess the question on that is, to what extent is that due to the changes we've made and the improvements in service in general? How much of that is just sort of a slow return to normality post-COVID? What are the reasons for those performance improvements, I guess, behind the numbers? And the flip side of that, the non-absolute, the gap between you know, the most deprived students and not is widening pretty significantly and pretty quickly. That's slightly scary, but also I guess it's more likely to be the deprived students that cost the most money. So in terms of those numbers, to what extent is that within our control and because of cuts and things like that versus because of, you know, post-COVID, or what are the reasons on both sides of the fence for those two major parts, please?
I'll give my take. I mean, Martin will come in and give his take on it, but I mean, my take on it in terms of there's how that general overspend has reduced over the last, and I would say it's probably the last 2 years. So we're talking not, you know, from the 22-23 financial year, when we were at the peak of an overall directorate original projected overspend of over £8 million. There's, in my view, there's been significant work by officers within the service in terms of bringing that down. And Martin talked about one element, which was agency staffing, which was creating huge overspends, several £1 million worth of overspends on agency staffing. that wasn't budgeted for, and those numbers have basically vanished over that period, and that's made a massive difference to the financial position. And then again around, particularly within children's safeguarding, there's been significant work in terms of the management of those placements and those young people from my perspective, a financial perspective as well. So I think that the vast majority of that has been down to the work in the service, which has been really a really positive thing in terms of the financial picture. But whether you have a different view, Martin?
No, I think just to add to that, I think without going through every performance bit, sort of performance by performance, if you like, it's difficult to describe which one would be as a result of changes post-COVID. In terms of the financial performance, very specifically, a huge amount of work has been done in the last 2 years to develop consistency within practice, having a very clear vision and practice model, having a particular approach to social work practice, which is about supporting children to stay at home, managing risk within families, rather than bringing children to care. So broadly, you've got 2 approaches to managing risk within social care. One is to sort of rescue children and put them into foster care, and the other one is about supporting children to be maintained within the family network. So many more children are now staying within their wider network, and we're finding safety within communities, which is the right thing to do, because long term, that's a far better outcome. We know that the care system has, on the whole, poor outcomes in the much longer term. So it is a proactive approach that we've taken in terms of delivering really high quality, world-class training to the workforce, having a consistent workforce to then apply that. And I think we've seen that year on year continuing to gain some confidence. And I would certainly say that we will continue to see, until the end of this financial year going into the next, that we will continue to see the right direction of travel. I don't expect this to go in the wrong direction, touch wood. I think it will continue to go further down in terms of getting towards a balanced budget.
Supplementary to, I guess, re-ask my last bit of question, which is, yes, there's still somewhere to go, but we're definitely a lot better financially, and I appreciate that point. Specifically on performance, again, there's lots of positives in there, and people can read through and see the arrows and stuff to make a kind of broad gesture, but the gap is widening between the most disadvantaged pupils and not. Picking an easy one, the first indicator about that is number 33. It's the one that's marked bad in big letters and red, which is the percentage gap between disadvantaged pupils and their peers achieving 9 to 4 English maths at Key Stage 4, which has gone from 32% to 44% in a year. That's a big leap, and I'm concerned by what might be causing that, what we can do about that. Obviously, if that's a one-off fluke of a year, there's presumably still some reasons why that might be a fluke of a year. If that's a more entrenched issue, how do we reverse it without spending more?
I think Maxine, you may not have been at the same scrutiny meeting, but I think Maxine Squire has probably gone into that some detail at the scrutiny. I think the reality is York has suffered in this particular area for many years. It's not something that we can easily improve. I guess it's also recognising the fact that for those that do very well, they're also doing even better. So the disadvantage becomes even more prominent. So, but Maxine, we could certainly probably come back to you on an individual basis after. I think Maxine could probably give you a much better description.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on some areas that have been delved into a little earlier. The change in practice has demonstrated difference in figures in terms of looking after children, and there had previously been a debate in scrutiny not to separate the looked after children who were coming through the unaccompanied asylum seeking system, and that was not to dispute that these were not children in our care, but that it would cloud the issues in terms of those that were being taken into care through the processes of the council and those that were being directed by the Home Office, and a completely different system, different budgets, but that enables a deeper scrutiny of this, even though I was given my head in my hands to play with. It's understanding how that progression will go on and the point at which you reach, that is the asymptote, and that you would keep at that level. And it's also understanding the work that's going in to resolve the safety valve matters. We did have a long discussion about SEN last time, but it's in terms of, again, we see the saving in the education psychologists. Appreciate with the national shortage of them, but it's those interventions to provide alternative provision that help parents and children to find appropriate alternatives to ECHP plans, and that gives a more satisfactory outcome to all, because at the focus is on the child. So it's understanding where we are with that progress, because you flag upon this that this year will be harder to reach the government target.
So in terms of the comment around the educational psychologist, again, with one or two people that tend to go off either through maternity leave or for other purposes, it's very, very difficult to respond very quickly and to get that solved. We've seen an underspend as a result of, unless Richard tells me I'm wrong, but we've seen an underspend last year as a result of not having sufficient education psychologists in post. That will play through this year in what is likely to be an overspend as a result of having to buy education psychology time. So it's not an education psychologist, but we need to buy private assessments effectively, or assessments through an agency. The difficulty with education psychology in terms of SEND, SEND, is that every educational healthcare plan needs the assessment of an education psychologist, the advice of an education psychologist. I think the government have recognised that we've got a very broken SEND system. I think they recognise that probably not every child needs that part of an assessment, and that may hopefully change in the future. But at the moment, like any other local authority, we're struggling because there simply aren't enough specialist professionals within the system. And unlike other professions, it's not something that people just choose to go into. It's actually the education psychologists are funded by government, so there are only so many places a year. So we're not even training enough to come into the system. So there's some huge challenges. I'm not sure that's answered your question, but there's some huge challenges around education psychology. And I do apologise because I've forgotten the first part of your question. But please do say if that's answered the second part.
It was to understand you over the last 2 years, there's been a practice change to ensure greater use of kinship caring and all of these other things. So it's the point at which you anticipate you'll have reached the limit on that.
Yes, a really good question, and incredibly difficult to forecast. What we will never do and move to is bringing children into care or not based on finances. It's got to be based on assessment of need and risk, and that will always fluctuate and change. But I think what we do have is national statistics and data that show us evidence of what the average is per 10,000 young people. We're just below now, I think, what the average per 10,000 is nationally. But that is a broad average. If you're in Blackpool, it could be something like 157 per 10,000. I think if you're in another local authority, perhaps locally, it's down to about 35 per 10,000. I think we're currently around 53 per 10,000, which is somewhere in the middle of that average. I would expect us, because our practice is getting better and better, and hopefully when we're inspected through an ILACS inspection, Ofsted will tell us the same. But I would expect us to continue to go in the right direction. I'm not sure we'll go below having around 200 looked after children. So I think we're getting close to what we describe as a sweet spot, but it's almost impossible to predict and forecast.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm referring particularly to page 14, paragraph 26 and 27, and their effect on paragraph 28. Simply because we know that the number of high needs pupils at all levels within the system is increasing. And it's not just the number, but the complexity of their situation is increasing. It's that business of arranging appropriate provision, and particularly for post-16 and post-19 pupils, because of the extension of the HCPs to age 25 when there is a special needs element. I'm also curious about the education element of out of authority placements. I'd hate that to be tied up with some kind of private enterprise, private equity group arrangement, if we can possibly avoid it. Generally, taking up the point that's elaborated in paragraph 27, we've got an increasing pressure on mainstream school budgets. Now, Maxine talked passionately about support for SEND pupils and pupils with the HCPs, and I think that members around the table wholeheartedly supported that plea for support. But I question whether we can live with a low level of school funding in the face of having a safety valve agreement, which we've got to meet in. Is it 2 years now, Martin? So, pardon? 25, 26?
End of 25, 26, the agreement says we should be back into balance.
We should.
Yeah.
I think the question I'm asking is, will we?
We have to submit a quarterly return, and I think that quarterly return is showing that there's evidence that it will increasingly become more challenging. We're not in the position of many authorities who are saying we simply can't do this or we won't be anywhere near it. I think we're in a much stronger position. But the reality is there will have to be a solution found at national level that resolves the issue of the SEND system is broken, and that has been recognised nationally by government, that we've got a system that cannot continue to work in its current form. I do think in terms of young people accessing mainstream education, we are with the government have announced a curriculum review. Part of the challenge in the last 10 years at least is that we've become the curriculum has become very focused on academia, and therefore makes it very difficult for schools to continue to try and support young people who aren't necessarily going to easily access that academic programme. And trying to find alternative offers within an education environment is hard. So I think that will have to be part of the solution from government in terms of reviewing the SEND system. But I think there's a lot of work to do to get us to a position where we see something that is going to balance. I think the last suggestion by the Association of Directors of Children's Services was suggesting a gap of about 6.4 billion if we were to continue to fund SEND as it is now.
That's nationwide.
Nationwide, not in York.
I thought I'd just clarify. I suppose the question is how quickly government will move to change those requirements, because I mean it's back to the A-level standard basically, which is propagated across education. It doesn't have to be A-levels, it could be GCSEs or whatever. And I just worry that we will be keeping the door very, very firmly near closed for many of these young people.
So it is a risk, and I think we will continue to feed back to the Department for Education at every opportunity we get that this is a risk for every single local authority up and down the country. And increasingly, I think it's recognised that almost every local authority, the risk of going into Section 114 territory is probably more of SEND than anything else in any local authority now. So it's something we've got to be acutely aware of. As I say, York isn't in the position that some are in, but I think we've got to continue to take it really seriously and be fairly careful once we get to the end of safety valve. Our school system does work well with us, but I think it's fair to say that it is under substantial pressure. in the same way as the school system is under pressure nationally, we're seeing a vast increase that isn't abating in terms of the request for education healthcare plans. So at the moment, that pressure in that system is just, I think, untenable until we get something that's going to change.
Thank you, Chair.
All happy? Councillor Rose, go on.
Well, I was just weighing up whether I'm allowed to ask questions about culture and communities when the report doesn't really talk about it.
If it's in here, you can ask the question.
There are a couple of the metrics that are positive in terms of outlook on hotels and visitors and numbers like that, but also the projected outturn variation 300k over. Just wondered if there's a bit more detail on what that is when there's not much in the paragraphs following, if that's possible.
Again, we could probably do with somebody from that service area here to give you a full detailed answer on that. But my understanding on particularly on the financial variation is that I think we're talking about a 333k projected outturn. I think the bulk of that 300k is due to assumptions that the £300,000 worth of library saving that was built into the budget won't be achieved in the current financial year, so that will be achieved, but on a slower time scale, because there's obviously work going on in terms of discussions with Explore around that particular contract. So that is the reason for that particular pressure. If you wanted a more detailed answer, we'd probably need the contract
I was going to say, I guess we haven't got
give those, but we can.
Anyone here can comment more on what those timelines look like, what the level of confidence is, all that sort of stuff, especially mid-contract negotiations.
Yeah, I mean, based on the financial projection, obviously that's been put in there as a full pressure for the full year. So on that, just that broad assumption is that won't be delivered in 24-25. I'd need to have a conversation with the contract manager to see whether it's delayed further than the end of 24-25, but we can get that answer for you if that's helpful. Yeah, do that.
Councillor Mason, Councillor.
Thank you, and apologies for being late. I was going to pick up on the library thing actually. I suppose so. Even though we think they'll be able to make the saving in this financial year, we expect the full saving even if it isn't made from the start of the financial year. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's the expectation. Yeah, so there's still the aspiration to gain that full saving once those processes have been completed. That saving will be delivered in full, but on a slower time scale, which is why we're projecting that pressure in the current financial year.
When you say a slower time scale, but you still expect the full amount by the end of the year, basically.
I don't know is what I'm saying on that bit. Again, I'll go back to the answer I give to Councillor Rose. I would have to get the contract manager here to give you a fuller detail in terms of where. I'm not sure where those discussions are at.
Just when you say slower time scale, makes me think it's the same thing, but not opposed to saying, oh well, halfway through it's halfway the money we would have taken or whatever. But slower time scale, I just wasn't sure the similar.
Yeah, I mean at the moment the financial projection isn't including any of that saving in 24-25 on this basis. So that's all I'm going on at the moment is what that's saying, but I will get a more detailed answer from that service area about what's actually happening with that and what their expectations are or assumptions are. Yeah.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you. Yeah. On the works going on and discussions, what level of detail will be available by the time of the next budget setting? And perhaps this is something that could come to scrutiny so that we're able to see what the implications are of the proposed impact on our libraries.
That's Martin.
Could I suggest, because I don't think there's anybody that could probably give a reasonable and full answer. I think it's probably if I take that away and ask the director of let's change the job title, or was the director of communities to come back and give some idea.
Yes. Do you think the next meeting is too soon?
I'll check if it can come back the next meeting. I'll check that it can.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, just I guess on that one, the current draft work plan has York Explores report coming to next meeting anyway. So if there's a way of having them discuss,
we'll add it on. Writing this down, please. We'll still tag it on as an extra point to include in the Explore. All happy? Thank you very much. Thanks, Richard. School attendance. I cannot see Maxine, which is unusual. Are you flying solo, Dan? You're a brave man.
Okay, welcome everybody. Nice to see you. I think the detail of this report, I'm not going to go through the numbers, but I expect you to make some reference to them in the discussion. So I'll take you straight to the summaries that follow. I think in summary, before we do that, I think it remains nationally a very challenging picture on school attendance, are very stuck. And I think we've already had sharp reference by members around the gap that exists for our vulnerable populations in York compared to those without those marked vulnerabilities within the codings of the education system. So in terms of overall progress, we see that the primary figures remain better than national overall. And the areas of the primary figures which are of growth free absence are those for SEN students and those where there is receipt of a free school meal. They're generally still better than they were 2 years ago, but they have ticked back up, and those are above average now in a way that they weren't. We've got an interesting picture across both phases that persistent absence, so that's those students who are below 90% attendance, we tend to do stronger on compared to national. And from the statistical analysis, that is because we have a particular tail of students with very low attendance that bring the overall figure down, whereas the actual number of those students is not as high in terms of the overall figures. In terms of secondary, it's very stuck. As you can see, is a regional variation as well. You can see that this northeastern area across York and Yorkshire and Humber is below national, and we match that. Again, our persistent absence rate is better than national and better than Yorkshire and Humber, but we've seen some quite steep tick ups in both the special educational needs and free school meal levels of absence at secondary. Those populations have grown, and they've grown by numbers and students who have experienced difficulties in that arena. So it's potentially not a surprise, but the fact that they remain stuck is a challenge. Against this, there's a lot of genuine best endeavours going on. We have established a attendance team that is now in a permanent structure following discussions there's been a slight reduction in keeping with some of the discussions we just had around the need to arrange that against the financial climate we work in. We've had a single school attendance advisor for over 20 years, which we made a successful appointment to replace in terms of Stephanie joining it. We've elevated the data and enforcement officer role. We've secured a secondment from a local academy chain for 2 days a week of support, and we've put some more formal administrative support in. This is an area I've got substantive line management for, and I'm currently in an interim role within SEND. So Karen Young, Head of Services, has taken this area over to give that importance of line management. I'm sure that there'll be some discussion around government messaging on this. Disappointingly, it tends to labour the punitive and the fine-based responses that a school and local authority may make. I wanted to reassure the Scrutiny Committee that although we've seen an increase in our use of those mechanisms, they are generally around absence due to holidays and term time. And that we are working with particular care around where they are applied for persistent absence, and particularly being aware of vulnerabilities that we may further challenge in terms of financial backdrops and in terms of relational backdrops. We know that relationships are the best way of improving school attendance and building a sense of belonging, and that they need to be maintained through any of our actions and any of our responses to those. Also, we want to keep the confidence of parents who are engaged with the system and those who are working hard to share this problem rather than to oppose it. In terms of the positive actions we've had, we do have proof of concept of what has the best effects in terms of this. We know that bringing a team round a child is effective. We know that cost of living and parental mental health and employment, and issues around housing and issues around a whole range of things exhibited by current societal scenarios are one of the main barriers, as well as what students arrive to at school. Where we have modelled that from our early help role, we've done that for 50 cases, so substantial data point, and 90% of those achieved improved attendance, some of them significantly. That is the role which is now being elevated to school attendance advisor. So it is a gap for us beyond that secondment, but we have modelled to the system, and schools have taken a lot of that work on to work through themselves. The amount of networking in the city is significantly more than it was 2 years ago, and is our roots to looking at this as a multi-agency solution, because it goes across all of our services. We've got well-established and very, very well-attended half-termly meetings with all of our primary and secondary colleagues. We also have a multi-agency attendance action group, which meets at the same frequency, and that includes representatives from social care, from the SEND team, from CAMS, the Learning Support Hub, and also from members of the voluntary sector. Our graduated response has been extended to include those areas as well, and we have managed to secure a further mental health support team for the east of the city to add to those present in the north and west, and to add to our school wellbeing service. We've worked with the Safeguarding Partnership to secure partner promises from other external groups which are part of the partnership, including police and including primary care colleagues. We've presented to GPs this current year, and we're working with the Raise York project in terms of looking at further networking our schools and our families to the support available within the city, including through the Team Around the School pilot. We've got specific targeting around schools in the north and the west of the city, particularly Vale of York and York High, which has shown good success in terms of reducing those students who are severely absent. In terms of our challenges, they are also overlapping in terms of the SEN arena that we said is challenging. It's around the strength of that ordinarily available offer, and the strength of the school offer being one that schools attach to families and attach to the students in their care. So our work is absolutely joined to some of the work in the SEND space that Maxine will have spoken about at last scrutiny, around our responses around building neurodiverse friendly schools, making sure that there are schools that are aware of the needs of their population and can work with both the parents and the families in their care. In terms of our experiences, it's in keeping with the Education Policy Institute analysis from September 23-24, which defines that the absence gap between the most vulnerable school children and their peers has widened further, increasing underlying inequalities across the sector. We don't have validated data yet from this current year, so our comparison is to the year before, but we know that those absences have embedded further nationally, and we await for that confirmation. In terms of our next steps, we were given, and you'll see some very warm comments from our DFE advisor, who works across over 20 areas nationally. But there's 3 tiers in the recommended DFE approach: the response of schools, which we've worked hard to increase consistency of in terms of our contact with them, and the graduated response, then the work of local authorities and trusts. We're in that final part of it now in terms of working across the system and working across other agencies and working with community partners and voluntary sectors to try and be in a position where we can bring a secure position, not just for all the children in York, where our figures can be reassuring, but for those that are most vulnerable, where our figures remain a concern.
Great, thank you. Councillor Mason, Councillor Colwick, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thanks. I suppose it's a bit aside of this, but I wondered where we've got the Hungry Minds pilots, if you see if that has any impact on attendance.
Yeah, we're tracking that in terms of the input from Westfield and Burton Green. We are needing to refine how we draw it in terms of absolute attendees to both. At the moment, we haven't got a secure piece in terms of cause and effect. We have seen some benefits to it, but we want to be more clear in terms of that being an absolute with those who are taking up that, and those in terms of the attendance rates. So I think it's definitely a point of exploration for this second year.
Thank you. I'd just like to give you the opportunity, if you will, to respond to the concerns raised by the one public speaker who joined us remote this evening. I just wonder what your response is to the points that were being made there.
Yeah, certainly since that, I think the second bit was around around COVID and illness and the challenges around that. I mean, I think the whole issue of school attendance became far more embedded and challenged around that pandemic response. I think that that schools continue to work sensibly with the advice that they've been given at national level. They will authorise if there is a clear medical position, and that's one which is generally parent certified initially. I think we ask them to look for patterns in that absence to see when that is further embedded, when there may be certain situations which are embedding or developing, or certain patterns such as certain days of the week which might work with things. So I think there'll always be dialogue around it. I think in terms of the infection risk, we've shared with all schools and with parents the NHS advice of when to send your child to school, and we'd expect to be working within those guidance pieces. We're educationalists rather than health professionals in that regard. I think the discussion around long COVID, I think, is a more difficult one to bear. I think the points made by the speaker on some of the early bits chime with what we're wrestling with in terms of some bits around SEN sufficiency. I think there's bits around the school offer being one that increases belonging and is meeting the needs of the population. And although we know our schools do that well for a large proportion, there are areas where we feel that we can jointly develop. And they're the areas which we're focusing on through our piloting work on neurodiverse friendly schools, for trauma-informed approaches, and for other areas where we've highlighted that the familial challenges are ones which need to be met across the piece.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think we've also done a lot of work that I think Dan has mentioned, particularly for those children that are open to a social worker. So we've made sure that education is on every single child's plan when they're open to a social worker, whether that's a child in need, child protection. Because I think the speaker also spoke about the balance between safeguarding children and protecting children, and the need to make sure that they are seen in school. It is important children are seen in settings, and I think whilst we focus and concentrate on the educational outcomes of children, we can't underestimate the huge input that is provided to children around the social education that they receive as they grow up in a setting with other young people. So I think, there's lots of national debate and different discussions on it, but I think, our role is to apply national government policy, and that's what we do and support schools to do that.
I think there's one final point, Matt's just reminding me, which is around elective home education, and we have seen an increase in that, but our numbers are well below the statistical neighbours in terms of those who are electively home educated. It remains a parental right. We do try to dissuade it and to encourage attendance within a school setting, but we know that for some of our families that's no longer remaining the choice that they would preference. So we always make sure that there is the option to return, and how to do that is really clear. And we look at fulfilling our duties in monitoring the education that's offered by parents who've taken that route.
Thank you. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, building quite a little bit on Councillor Mason's question, we know that York is a city of significant inequalities. Essentially, you've got some very wealthy parts, some not so wealthy parts, and that is reflected across a range of statistics. And when I see citywide figures, and we compare them with Yorkshire and the Humber, and we think we're doing very well, we know that there are intricacies there and balances there. I just want to know if there was any sort of way that you could perhaps demonstrate to us a breakdown of this data citywide, and any particular areas of the city where we do well, areas where we don't do so well, and what your strategy will be, acknowledging that although of course we are one city, there are differences within the different parts of it.
Yeah, one of the I mean, it's worth reflecting to Scrutiny that obviously we're working under statutory duties now for attendance since August of this year. I mean, we already had really good support from our schools in terms of their voluntary sign up to the DfE portal. So what that means is that every day we draw live data from all of our school settings, and we're already doing that, which is part of the investment in the new role. So we can break it down as granular as we need. I think this is my third time at Scrutiny. I think the first time we gave it by cluster within the city. We can report a little bit more specifically on the secondary school data. We are happy to return and to do that. It is spiky, and I think that's probably part of what you would like to inquire around. So, for example, in the secondaries, we've got 2 schools which are well above. We've got 5 schools which are there or thereabouts, and we've got 2 schools a little bit further away. You know, I think on another occasion we could sort of track that a little bit more closely if that was useful to members.
And just to add, I think it's probably also important to point out that whilst we do have considerable deprivation and disadvantage within the city, sadly, or not sadly, that's the wrong term, it isn't enough to get substantial government funding that other areas do get. So again, that contributes towards that disadvantage in a city like York, where you know there are other authorities that they're getting funding around early help, early support, youth services, health services that York simply doesn't attract because it doesn't have the level of deprivation to attract that level of funding. And this is a whole system issue. It's not just a school issue. This is a whole system issue for children.
Sorry, I was thinking of it. Just, I was processing a thought and that answer, that was all. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of smaller points to raise. I think it's a particular concern that everybody around the table will share that there's an increase in persistent absence, particularly from free school meals in primary, and free school meals also in secondary. And without going into the detail of how you're tackling it at this point, I wonder if we could have some kind of summary of progress made and any lessons learned, let's say over the next term and a half, 2 terms, please.
I think in terms of that, Ian, just to sort of take that point, and I'm happy to then keep coming back. I think we know that in terms of that free school meal model, that's where that early help has been something we've particularly pushed. We've gone for the new early help strategy, widening the partners involved and sharing that further. I think what I would really want to draw out here is these come out as our sort of splits in the DFE coding. What we really usefully have started to look at, what really does draw both of those areas, is the crossover between those students who are both in receipt of free school meals and also have a special educational need. So we've got a lot of dual representation, and if you are in a position where you're getting our schools working with a Venn diagram, so they can identify those students who have both of those vulnerable characteristics, and we know that is a particular risk point in terms of attendance challenges.
Yeah, I'll look forward to hearing more about that later. But you mentioned Venn diagram. I was particularly interested in Kevin's comments on page 37. I'd be interested to know how those Venn diagrams are constructed. And
it started with that diet understanding the 2 characteristics. So I turned it off, not on. Thank you. So it started with the desire to look under that double counting of vulnerability. So it ended up with one Venn diagram being around being in receipt of a free school meal, one having either an SEND support or HCP. And then we look to see those students in the middle. And what we push schools to do is to move away from seeing the numbers in their data and to use the ideally a photograph of the child in the middle. So they were talking about their 8 or 9 most vulnerable students in their setting who had both of those areas of vulnerability, and then to look at how they might be usefully supported to meet both of those needs, both collectively and together. So we did that. It was something that Kevin took away and shared with other areas, and then other schools, and then our school system widened that, and they used other variables. So they utilised other parts of their population, those students who were supported by a social worker, those students potentially who had an EAL need, and they started looking at those competing needs so that they could most easily see the multiple factors that might be affecting the education of individuals. Because we can look at these percentages all day long, but they're all driven by an individual's story, and we would push that message hard to our schools to see them see the people underneath the statistics we look at here.
Yeah, thank you. Particularly interested in your comments about, if you like, external help outside the educational establishment we're talking about. particularly interested in the relationship of the early help model to that, and how the family hub, the Race York Family Hub, is actually interacting with that. Again, not necessarily for tonight, but could we have a little bit more information on that and how it works? I mean, the Race York is a comparatively recent introductee, and it would be good to know how could I put it, how that's fitting and how it's working with and bringing up to date other routes to solving this problem.
Just really quick feedback, but I think the best example we've got around that is our piloting work around team around the school. So we're working with, first of all, early help is a whole range of partners, and some partners that schools aren't even aware of in terms of the settings available to them. So we've piloted with Fishergate School a model where they were able to tell us their significant challenges that they were looking to meet as educational sort of settings. We then attached them to the partners we knew within the system, and then revisited the impact that would had. And it was significant because it wasn't about creating a team for that school, it's about them finding the team and finding the team from existing resource. We're now piloting that across 7 new schools. We're doing that with Clifton Green next. And there's a meeting with 10 partners and that school going on very soon. As we say, I think this is a multi-headed beast in terms of the problems, but also the solutions. So attaching families, school settings, and the child to signposting, to services, but also to mindsets and cultures that can aid is really positive.
And lastly, if I may, on page 38, the third bullet point down talks about NHS funded mental health support teams. It would be really interesting to have an update of that as the system is seen to have got going from your point of view, because I suspect it's still fairly early days to comment on that.
We've had 2 in the system for a while. We've just again, to cover Martin's point, we had to win a competitive bid to get the 3rd team. So they're supporting in east and northeast areas of the city. We already had the west and north. They work alongside our school wellbeing service, and they're very, very attached to this agenda. So they attend our attendance action group. So they come to that as NHS representatives, and they have also picked up direct contact with our electively home educated cohort. So they are working with some of them as well as a particular part of our last bid. So they're a pre-CAMS tier for the pathways around particularly emotional health.
I suppose the interest I've got is, how's that doing in terms of referring people onto CAMS quicker, or maybe deciding that there's no need to refer them to CAMS?
Yeah, and they have their own reports on that. I think that's part of the work which they're working through. I mean, I think CAMS waiting list is another barrier in terms of the work probably not being referred to very specifically so far, but no, thank you for that reference point. It's around, they would be able to show evidence that although the referrals to CAMS may be dropping off slowly, the appropriateness is increasing, and they have their own reporting structure, which I've got access to, and I attend the steering group of, around where their margins are. Pleasingly, they're working on school culture as their first piece of work, surveying large portions of schools across staff, parents, and students. Then they're also doing universal offers around signposting and assemblies, and then working through targeted offers where appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think just to add, we've relaunched our early help strategy this week, which has been a combination of work across at least 15 partners, I believe, and it will be going out to publication very soon. We've had 3 sessions, which, based on the feedback, we will probably rerun some sessions. Some have been in schools, but I think we'll rerun some sessions and invite this group if you'd like to attend. I think what it does show is the phenomenal amount of support that is in the city across an early help system. And early help isn't a service. Early help is a system of different things that exist. It's about people that already have a relationship with young people, just reaching that a little bit further to support a young person. So we will get, once we've got those in the diary, we'll maybe extend invites across to this group if you'd like to come along and just see what's happening.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on that, the early help work. Certainly, the ability for pastoral teams in schools to readily connect with other bits of the council and with external agencies is something that I've personally been pushing for a very long time, and delighted that as a member I could move more in that direction. There is so much. The feedback I got was that schools were delighted with what was on offer, but understanding how everything connected, what was on offer, was probably worth a series of YouTube videos so that other members of staff who aren't at those sessions can dip in and understand how these systems work together. And it's having the confidence that it is based around a child. So if there are different agencies working, that they know about each other and they're working in a complementary way with the schools. I think it's also important, you mentioned the national messaging, which is creating a lot of friction, which is it's quite difficult now that many of the decisions are now being pushed down to the schools. So it's really on them in terms of giving permissions for holidays, leaves of absence, and whilst there will be, I'm sure, a lot of effort put into demonstrating that there's a fair approach being taken, it still is important to ensure that any advice that goes down to schools, there's a sense of they're all working together and that one school isn't being picked off or well, you know, they'll always let you go off or they will never let you go off. It's having that strength across the piece, which is more complicated now that only a minority of schools are maintained, that it is getting that message across. So I think it's important to make sure that everyone knows what everybody else is doing, so there's a clearer message across the city.
Yeah, and the attendance leads meetings have been really powerful in terms of that. And what's been really pleasing is we've had the Academy Trust leads come into that as well as their schools. So we've looked to try and move as one on those mechanisms. And the members may remember that 2 years ago we did quite a public messaging on attendance to move as a system, and we've maintained that principle and that way of working. It's always been the head teacher's decision on when to authorise an absence and when not to, so that hasn't changed, but our joint discussions on it have definitely firmed up.
Yeah, very briefly, Chair, just very pleased to see that Fishergate's leading the way once more in this particular area. And as the Council of Fishergate ward, thank you for working with that school in my ward, and just thought it might be very useful for councillors to get a more in detail briefing about that particular project and seeing it rolled out to their other wards.
Absolutely. Tina Clark and myself will be happy to talk to you.
Thanks, Chair. As you know, I'm fairly new to this committee. I don't have a question, but I want to say something nice before everyone leaves the room as they give their reports. I just want to say, I think the quality of the work that's gone on behind this and in the previous report, and the quality of the reports that we've had so far, and those still to come on the agenda, and the quality of answers we've got at the table, I just find it a breath of fresh air. And that's why I'm so quiet, which is a rarity. And I just want to say thanks and well done. And hopefully I'm not setting up the people after you for a big fall. But scrutiny is about the good stuff as well as the less good stuff and the bad stuff. So I just wanted to say that. Compared to what I've become used to, I have a problem when I can't really get into stuff. But you know, hats off to you. I think other areas of the council could learn a bit from how this committee seems to be served. Anyway, that's my lot for the night. I'll get back to normal business in due course.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. I worry as well because it seems to go so well. Any more questions before Councillor O'Dwyer?
Yeah, I mean, I echo all those points. They were both very good reports, and yet I do have questions. You obviously heard my points on the previous agenda item about particularly the gap between those who are more well off and those who are less well off, and I think it's very obviously and deeply entrenched here. And just picking the numbers out, we're better than national average for non-free school meals in primary. It got better over the last year, but we were worse already, and it got worse for those in free school meals. Persistent absences, the same thing. We were already better than the national average, and that's consistent. We're now below the national average for free school meals. Secondary, it's exactly the same thing. We were already better for non-free school meals. We were already worse by quite a lot, and getting worse again. And then ditto for persistent absence with over 50%. So I guess going back to the public participation, 100% agree with what Flick said. If you're using this as a pass-fail for a child, then you're doing it wrong. But they are useful indicators. From an indicator perspective, that's deeply worrying that we're at such a gap, and that gap is widening the more that we look at it. And we need to find a way of addressing that, because if our numbers are okay as a city, but it's just because our well-off kids are doing well, that's a real bad place to be. From using it as a metric, as a pass-fail, the all students is 25% persistent absence at secondary schools. This metric is clearly rubbish, right? So is there a way of measuring something that's more useful that doesn't have such a high percentage? Failing it, is there another threshold that's not a nationally acknowledged persistent absence figure or whatever, but is there a way of looking at it where you actually get a bit more nuance and we can actually measure against it? Because if more than half of everyone on free school meals is failing a metric, it is a really bad look, even if we're seeing it as an indicator.
Yeah, I suppose again that's something to explore in terms of what scrutiny we find most useful. We're reporting against the statutory figures, so if either on the school by school basis, as we had comment from before my members, or in terms of the layers within it. We do that obviously because we can draw it through as daily data. So those students who are 93% plus, 92% plus, we could look at sort of jointly considering what would be the most useful kind of measures to consider. Also, it drops from 90% to 50% in the government bit, and there's lots of layers between 89% and 51%, but you're in the same count. So I think that is absolutely something which we do with our schools, and we can share more openly. I think your question around free school meal, I think our schools would absolutely say that we are championing the same as you rightly have done here. I think it's an issue that York on both academic outcomes and attendance outcomes needs to stare in the face and be clear on. It needs to be something which we're really aware of. In terms of that story, it's been around for a while, as we acknowledged in the early part of this meeting, and we need to look what the solutions are. For me, the solutions are all about relationships. They're all around a sense of belonging. They're around expertise, around overlapping areas of need in SEN and free school meal, and they're around us having a school system that's right for the children in their care. I think the points that Martin made around curriculum before were really right. Because making sure that children come to something which is relevant for them in terms of curriculum and supportive of them in terms of the community that it presents is our best cards in terms of making sure that school is a vital part of children and families' lives.
Thank you. And echoing some of the points that I've already made around when you go more granular into the detail, I'm sure there are peaks and troughs, there are highs and lows geographically per school. Looking at the overlap between special educational needs and free school meals, I think is key. There are also needs that aren't SEND needs, that it'd be good to get into the detail of some of those. And it also ties into the point you made earlier around homeschooling numbers and the fact we do need to have a more flexible education system to actually meet the needs of the kids in those systems. But I was wondering if I could get your take on if you have any feeling for the reasons for homeschooling and those increases. I know nationally there's been some studies gone into it that it's more broadly linked to special educational needs, the inability to meet needs of more gifted kids, academically speaking. Travel as a community, that nationally there are challenges around homeschooling there, but also obviously we're aware of people homeschooling because of educational choices or policy choice or whatever it might be. But I wonder if you could give us a kind of vibe for it.
Yeah, we record the reason against codes that a family go to a position of electively home educated. Previously, it was generally a preference and a preferred style of education. I think the growth that there's been post 2020 has generally been around the areas that you said. I think around SEN and the sense around whether the school system is providing what their child needs and whether it's having a counteractive effect in terms of any kind of any masking or burnout at home that school might not be seeing, which the parent feels was better during that period of school closure. And I think there's a significant growth through mental health and anxiety, where parents are saying that they can reduce that anxiety from taking away a factor of that school attendance. I think we've got to make sure we're working supportive with that. We talked about some of the mechanisms we can support that through, so we don't end up in a period of adversary. And that was, I think, probably our public speaker again today, making sure that we're connected when we're having those concerns, and we're looking at how we can alleviate those worries rather than getting to a point of fracture.
No, it's not a question for now. It's just, as everyone's picked up, is we have to think somehow as a council as how to represent those differences between the affluent places and the less affluent places. And it comes up in different of the 2 reports now, too, isn't it? Where there's a difference, and it's what percentage do we have to be bad at before we can get some extra support and funding? It's almost like the incentive is for my ward to do less well and to not go to school, bring the average down, which is not a way of doing it. So I think somehow we know whether we have a working group or something, but just a way of the council measuring better the differences to help you out, really. So without creating ourselves some more work, I think we do need to give some thought to it. Yes, Martin.
So I completely agree that any political lobbying from all parties of additional funding to help the whole system. And again, this isn't just about education; it's the whole system and all public money that goes into supporting young people from an early help perspective. I do want to just be really clear, just in terms of, and just point out the obvious, really, particularly around disadvantage and the difference between disadvantage. In some local authority areas where you've got 100 children in the school that have 3 school meals, they obviously represent 1%. Actually, I'll take a mathematician. This will show how good or poor my maths are. But if you've got a high representation of 3 school meals by comparison to a very small number, every child represents a bigger percentage. So, counting by percentage isn't always a helpful way of counting whether we're equal to something else. I think the fact that our numbers, by the very nature of our city, will be lower than other local authority areas, some other local authority areas, means that every child represents a higher percentage of disadvantage. If that makes sense. Did that make sense?
Yeah. Bob's going to explain it even better. Look.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to try that at all. I thought it was a wonderful attempt, Martin. No, I just think one thing we need to hold in our heads around this is poverty. And apologies, I'm late. I was at an event where I was talking about food poverty and about sort of free school meals and things like that. And one of the benefits of your free school meals, whatever that is the benefits to the family outside, because you're actually putting more money in their pockets. And I think that taking this report in isolation when we're talking about attendance and what could the school do, the schools can, there's always things the schools can do, of course there are, but we shouldn't forget that actually this is a broader approach that has to tackle poverty in general, because actually if you get that young person's housing right, you will probably do far more good than anything that could happen in the school, for example, or if you make sure that they've got the right clothes before they go to school, for example. Those things have a big impact. So I think it's maybe not just work for this committee. I think it's a broader thing across the council.
And obviously a lot of people have asked for feedback down the line, but you don't come back for another year. So without creating new makes. Is it worth getting an update, answer some of the questions that have been put rather than us having to wait a whole year? Is there some data that will become available, even if it's just a written report that we can, you know, receive as a committee rather than just waiting for another report in a year's time? Is there a point where you can say, yes, well, there's some good data and I can answer the questions raised?
Yeah, I'm in terms of that, I'm not quite sure how the schedule gets developed, you know, but I'm perfectly happy for it to be something that we do biannually, rather than annual.
We'll come back when talking about that again. All happy? Lovely jubbly. Thank you. Right again. Are you brought with you, Barbara? The 3 degrees.
Hi, I've brought with me Don Wood, who's the programme lead for early years and the wraparound reforms. And I brought with me Kerry Lee, who's the wraparound programme officer as well. I thought it'd be good for you to meet them today.
Indeed, thank you. Thanks for giving your time.
Thank you. So the purpose of the report today is to update you on the progress that we've made in implementing these reforms, which are significant since the last time that we met you, which is the beginning of this year. And the background is that the government, they announced earlier last year that they wanted to extend the early years entitlements and expand the wraparound market all for working parents. The extended early years entitlements, they've been phased in from April this year. And for the first time, eligible working parents of 2-year-olds, they can take up to 15 hours of early education each week. And from this September, it's been the same for children from 9 months old. And those entitlements are going to double to 30 hours each week from September next year. And at the same time, there's a significant expansion of the wraparound market, with an expectation it is offered from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, where there's that demand coming through from working parents. And to do all of this, the local authority, we've received from the DfE 333,000 of capital to support both programmes, that's early years and wraparound, as well as 579,000 revenue for the wraparound programme. And we also received £10,000 revenue from the DfE to support the commission of after-school provision for children with complex needs. And we plan to test the market as part of our first wave of commissioning of new places. And that's going to happen this month in October. And although that last amount is a very small amount, it is a celebration. We've managed to secure that from the DfE. The timescales for the overall programme, they're very tight. And one of the key tasks that we've completed already is the delivery plan for the DfE about the wraparound expansion. And that's now been assessed and agreed by the DfE, which has released the revenue funding which we received at the end of the summer term. And since we reported in January, we've had the change in government and they've confirmed their commitment to the reforms, as well as that they want us to work to the same timescales, again, which are very tight. And it's worth noting that they also have an ambition to open 3,000 nursery places by using spare places in primary schools, and they've confirmed a breakfast offer in every primary school, and details of these are just beginning to emerge over the last week and being made public, and there'll be opportunities being opened out for applications to go into the DfE. So in terms of our progress for the reforms, one of the first key steps that we've taken was the local authority recruiting to increase the staffing capacity. So we've now got in place Dawn and Kerry, and we also have a programme support officer, and we work very closely with the DfE strategic partner. And they do consider us to be very light touch because of the knowledge, the skills, the experience that we have, and those good partnership arrangements that we have with the early years and childcare sector. The second key area of progress has been the deep dives that we've done into sufficiency of the early years in the wraparound market. So we know exactly where and how many places are needed, with a focus on baby places, after-school provision for children with complex needs, SEND places more generally, and to ensure that the eligible 2-year-olds aren't displaced by the new entitlements. The third key area
has been seeking approvals to the overall programme spend from full executive and preparing all the documentation to commence that large commission round this month. And executive have signed off that report in September. So other progress I've listed on paragraph 17, and in terms of early years, we've consulted on a funding formula. We've agreed funding rates for the sector for the different age groups, and we've also implemented moving from termly payments to providers to monthly, and that's been really helpful for childminders as well. We're currently refreshing our sufficiency analysis in readiness for September next year, September 25, when those entitlements will double. And that's where our real pressure point's going to be, and a long lead-in time needed to make sure we've got those places. And we have parent and provider surveys which have just closed, and we're currently analysing those responses that have come through. Continue to promote tax-free childcare, and throughout we've engaged with the sector, kept them up to date with information from the D and from ourselves. Recruitment and retention is still an ongoing pressure, but there's a national recruitment strategy underway, and we do what we can locally to support with recruitment. In terms of wraparound, I've mentioned earlier about the sufficiency analysis that we've done with the out-of-school clubs, and also the delivery plan that Kerry completed, which has been fully signed off by the DfE. At the end of the summer term, we did see the closure of a long-standing club, and we intend to procure for a new provider once that building has been formally handed back to the local authority, and we've completed a condition survey, because we need to know what that building looks like at the moment before we can actually recruit back out. And it does mean we've got a gap in that area, unfortunately, for working parents at the moment. But in the meantime, we've signposted to FIS for brokerage, alternative arrangements, and to the local school. And it's not ideal at the moment. And for children with complex needs, we've worked with our primary special school to get a much better understanding of what the delivery costs are in readiness for testing the market for an after-school club. And the costs are going to be much higher for children with complex needs due to the ratios of staff to children, to be able to care for them and to keep them safe. Communications and briefings with providers are ongoing, and we made a positive presentation about the wraparound expansion after school club conference in August. And we continue as a local authority representative on the DfE's national wraparound steering group. I've set out the risks at paragraph 42 of the report, and the key risk is the potential failure of the local authority to expand the market to meet that new parental demand. In mitigation, the DfB have been monitoring our readiness on a termly basis, and there's been ongoing support from the local authority, from their strategic support partner, but we are regarded as a light touch authority because they know that we're a good authority. We know our childcare market, and we've got experience of facilitating its expansion. And another risk is the planning permission, where this is needed to expand the provision. And we are encouraging collaboration through a market engagement event, which is going to be held next week with providers and in all of the commissioning documentation, to make sure we get that quality information back from them in a timely way, so that should support the planning application process so it works as smoothly as possible and we can avoid any unnecessary delays. So finally, we're asking Scrutiny tonight to note the contents of the report and to receive further updates in due course as well. And we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Just with some changes in my working and potentially in some areas of this to do with my current employment, probably best not to be involved in any of the questions and debates. I'm going to leave at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, two quick questions. The first one is, you mentioned the risk management, paragraph 42, the potential failure of council to facilitate and expand the childcare market. I was just wondering if you had a sense for how likely that risk is. Do we feel like we're going to be able to rise to meet that need in the city, or does it feel like that's a real danger that, at least to start with, we're going to struggle to meet that need?
I think traditionally, historically, the market in York has been very responsive. because we've had policy changes over the years. And particularly when you think about when the 2-year-olds were introduced, the eligible twos, they were anxious about it, didn't know how they were going to manage that, but they did actually respond with a bit of nurture and thinking about the business planning side of things. And there has been some capping going on of places because they've struggled to recruit and retain staff. And I think they've capped in some places of the authority of the city to make it more manageable for them. We need to drill down to individual providers in individual wards to see what the barriers are for them. Because I think the ones that are a bit stuck now are the ones where it's a bit harder for them to move forward. Others have expanded. We've had drink houses that has made some changes to its layout of its accommodation, being able to take on more children from the waiting list. But I think we've got reason to be optimistic, and we are currently RAG rating the providers across the city to say where there are some that we need to work with a bit more intensely. Some of it's about recruitment and retention. We might have to do things more differently to what we've done in the past. Some of it may be around business planning as well. And some of it may be about introducing new providers into the market as well, without displacing that good and outstanding provision that we've got, because it's a fine balance to be able to strike as well.
Thank you. Do you have a sense for where geographically we'd be likely to be short if we are short? Which parts are struggling more than others for places at the moment?
Currently, we know that we are tight in the Micklegate ward, and so there is more work to be done there. Because we did see some closures over the last couple of years, and I think premise has been the most difficult, been a real challenge to find somewhere that's appropriate to have a nursery space and after school space. And the other area is Clifton Green, because we lost Little Acorns Day Nursery on the Clifton Green Children's Centre site. But because we had vacancies within the area with other provision, a lot of those children have been absorbed into that current provision. But there's still some capping going on in the Clifton area. And that's why we need to have those individual conversations, see how we can encourage them to think about unlocking some of those potential spaces across the city. And because we are compact as a city, some parents can move a bit further around the system, and we've got sort of areas around where nurseries where we might struggle to have some spaces. There might be some other nurseries within a reasonable distance that could offer something. But I think we've got to be careful about parents who are disadvantaged and might find it hard to travel. So we are very mindful of making sure we take all of that into consideration when we do that sufficiency. I don't know whether Dawn's got anything further to add around that.
No, just to echo that we are refreshing all the data and looking at where we've got potential gaps, but then where we can kind of look at surrounding area. And we're using section 106 kind of methodology, which is 1.5 kilometres, which is just less than a mile, to ensure that those families can access that childcare locally. Because like Barbara says, we don't want to displace those disadvantaged twos as these new working entitlements kind of come next year. We want to ensure that we've got those places locally for those families.
I've got supplementary. When you're asking the parents, then do you ask them what is their sort of, do you make them think about how far you're prepared to go in terms of taking your child to childcare? It's like, for example, ours is 3 miles from where we live because it's on the way to work. My wife goes to Richmond, which is easy for us, but it's not in the catchment area that you would even think about. So how much prompting to get parents to think about where they go to work as much as where they live to get the answers?
Sometimes it's harder to find those solutions, and we refer families to the Family Information Service to do the brokerage with the family. And some of those solutions aren't ideal. And probably the best example I can give you is when we lost a day nursery in the Micklegate ward, and parents had to travel further afield, and they couldn't necessarily always get the days that they wanted. So there has been quite a lot of compromise over the years as well. And that's why we do need some choice in the system and a bit more flexibility. But so we have a fairly responsive market, and I think where providers can help, they certainly will. And we have noticed a shift in the market where there seem to be lots of vacancies on a Monday and Friday. I think that's around that flexible part-time working. And we know of one set in the city that's trying to make that a more attractive offer around Monday and Friday, so they can try and, you know, fill those places up. But it is quite bespoke when we're working with families, and we can do that hand holding through FIS as well.
I was just going to add to that around your question about, we are mapping where families move and access early education funding as well, to kind of inform that decision making, because we're finding in one area that people are migrating into that area for childcare. In other areas, it's people are migrating out of that area for childcare, and making sure that we look at that migration in and out of wards as well.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things from me. The first thing is to say, and I sent an email on this in a similar vein, but I don't know where the email ended up. I hope it was passed on. But I just want to say thanks to those involved with bringing in those monthly payments for providers. You know, it was a completely new thing for me to be lobbied on last year, and but it was a really difficult and tricky issue for some providers. So the council's response to it in pretty fast time by council standards too, I think is well worth applauding, and I've got good feedback from the providers who I spoke to about it, and they're very grateful for it. And I have a question unrelated to that, and I'm really sorry if this has already been covered when I was out of the room. But recently had a kid, and one thing that I'm still shocked by, and it does relate to some of what's just been said actually, is the time pressure to get in registered with nurseries is insane. Like, I think we must have been about 4 or 5 months in, if that, and other expecting parents were saying, you need to get registered, you need to get registered. And it's like, we haven't even like, it's such an early time in the process to think about where you're going to send your unborn child to hours and hours every week. And I just find it mind-blowing. So is there any mileage in potentially having some sort of campaign that says to would-be parents, wait, take your time, you'll all end up with a provider of some sort? Or is that just not feasible? Do you see what I'm getting at? And because I've been thinking, maybe if everyone's getting the same idea and everyone's panicking, are the same providers getting overloaded and other providers just sort of left hanging, even though they might be all right at what they do? I'm really sorry if you've already covered this. Does what I'm saying make sense? Yeah.
It does actually, and you wouldn't believe that people are even planning their babies around the entitlements, the new entitlements as well. We have heard that quite a bit. But it is down to parental choice, you know, when they're conceiving early on in the pregnancy, that they do want to actually go right, and it's about personal choice, where they, you know, that which appropriate space fits their needs as a family as well. And every nursery feels different when you walk into it, you know, and it's the staffing, it's the different arrangements, but it's been that's been an ongoing. Even when my children were, when I was pregnant, I had the same thing. I had to do it really early on, and I was quite shocked at that time, that how early you had to plan that provision. But what we've had, that there are more places being created. I think the market's been really tight for a number of years, and we haven't had that slack. But I think there's lots more capacity. There are more vacancies, it seems to me, and I think it's about that drop in the birth rate. It's not an even fate, because it depends on what the demographic is in local areas. But I think that there are definitely more spaces and vacancies, giving that much more choice to parents as well. And it's about charging as well. You know, what are the additional charges for parents? There's lots to consider for parents.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right that there's a lot to sort of take in the round. That I just, yeah, hopefully it eases up following these changes. But I don't, even if you think about the cost element and the location, I still worry that there'll be a lot of parents out there who can't necessarily make the best choice because they feel rushed into signing up to somewhere. And it's really hard to say at that's such a early stage of the family, you know. I don't know what the answer is. It's just a point of curiosity and mild concern, I suppose.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the issue of recruitment and retention, that's all very well government saying we're going to make this offer available, but there have to be the buildings you've touched on and the staff to run that. What's being done citywide to ensure that there's enough people being trained to do this? And also picking up on this conjecture that primary schools are full of empty classrooms, just sitting there waiting to be converted, which is not the case. And so it's understanding the mapping of that on the work that you're doing.
Thank you. So I'm going to defer to Dawn and Kerry to talk about recruitment and retention because the work that they're doing.
So on the recruitment and retention, it is a national issue and the government are looking at that, and they've started a campaign called the Do Something Big campaign. Don't know whether you've seen it on TV. There's some lovely adverts of people playing with children. So what we've started doing is promoting that across the city. We know that in the city, I'm only new to York. I've only been in post 2.5 months, but from speaking to colleagues, we know that we've got a recruitment issue in York, and there just aren't enough people that qualified. We are working with the universities as well to look at their intakes on getting the workforce into the universities to get them qualified. We're also working with the day nurseries and the out of school provision to get them to think differently about how they recruit, looking at recruitment packages of support for them and putting training on to look at recruitment, but also getting them to think how they can utilise their staff differently, because we've historically looked at the workforce as being only level 3s, and we need to think differently to that and maybe growing their own workforce and looking at level 2s and how they can fit into their ratios without affecting quality.
I think just to add to that, in terms of the wraparound development, so as part of our delivery plan, we made a request to the DfE for some training for staff. So we've developed with colleagues regionally some play work training, which maps to common core skills. And we're looking to offer some training in relation to supporting children with SEND. So that element of thinking about the workforce being equipped to deliver what we want, and that kind of encouraging people to be part of that workforce, because that training package is there to support them. So we're working on that locally and regionally with colleagues.
And the last point around the surplus, the commitment around the surplus places, the nurseries that they wanted to, the government wanted to set up. I don't know how applicable that's going to be in York, because we have lots of families that migrate into the city, and I think the amount of housing development that's taking place, we are going to need those places in schools as well, so we don't particularly want to lose them. And also the fact that we've got rising SEND as well, and wanting to make places more inclusive in schools. So I don't think it will be so applicable for us in York, and we haven't got the childcare deserts that's been referred to in the press in disadvantaged areas, but they do exist in other parts of the country.
Just as a follow-up, it's a more general point about there'll be a lot of focus on getting this to work, because you'll have hundreds of kids entering the system. It's how does this work in with the early talk for York? And you touched on quality. It's ensuring that at the same time, there is who's looking at the quality provisions so that everyone's getting the best start in life, because this is a critical age.
Absolutely. We have our quality improvement team that work under Derek, and they're very focused on the outcomes for those children, particularly the children that are disadvantaged. And they work with settings to improve quality. And I can say that we are today at 100% good and outstanding across our early years providers. So that includes childminders, playgroups and day nurseries. And because of that positive work that Rob Newton's been doing on early talk for York, which has been rolled out in many of the day nurseries across the city, particularly in areas of disadvantage, that is beginning to make an impact, and it's changing that culture of the way that they work in those settings. So there's some fantastic work that's going on across the city to support our young children, giving that best start.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Evening, Barbara and team. Thank you for a very interesting report. I've got a few questions, and I'll try not to get down into too much detail. First of all, Barbara, I'm sorry, I think it's my hearing, I missed some comment that you were making about a new building and seeking planning permission. Was that a single building, or was that treating applications for new building for premises purposes?
I think that's thinking ahead. When we do our refresh of the sufficiency across the city, we may identify pockets of the city where there's a clear gap. So there may be, might be a new build, and it might be through Section 106, the developer contributions for early years, where it needs new premises completely. So that would need planning permission. But also if there's some sort of reconfiguration of a building as well, you know, where they can offer some additional places, but that, again, that might need planning permission.
Thank you. I'm glad you've reassured me on that one, I suppose. I was wondering about the 10K for supporting the commissioning of specialist after school provision. 10K doesn't seem like a lot of money, and I wondered if you could give us an indication of how you're proposing to spend that. For instance, could it be a few hours of somebody's expert time, or have we got other thoughts for it?
Yes, so in terms of send within the wraparound programme for the after school provision that we're looking to develop, within our delivery plan, we costed out send provision at around £3,000 per place. So that will be part of the commissioning process. That £10,000 is additional with that. So that will take that up to 46,000 to look at how we could potentially develop after school provision for our children with more complex needs.
So you're saying 3K for each complex needs place?
That's what the DFE have set as the maximum.
Right, okay, so up to 3K for each complex need.
Yeah.
But what does this 10K do? Is that 10K one single amount? Or is it 10K for each provider? Or is it 10K for each?
It's 10K into potentially to build on that 36,000, so makes it 46,000 for that specialist provision. It might be more, it might be less. We might need to go back to the DFE and ask for the remainder of our funding to be released from our delivery plan. There's a little bit of funding that we didn't request as part of our delivery plan, and I think we've probably got a really good case to be able to go back and ask for that additional funding to support the SEND development. Yeah. Because it is expensive to deliver that.
I know it's needed.
Yeah,
absolutely no problem with that. What I'm bothered is that we've got the money that we need, and then of course the staff that are suitably trained. So what was the 36K?
So that's within the delivery plan.
Yeah.
We costed out 12 places for children with complex needs at £3,000 per place. That's our assumption. So what we've had to do with our delivery plan is make a number of assumptions about what provision will look like in the city.
Okay. So is that 12 places across the city?
Could be, or it could be 12 places at one point. We don't know until we go out to commission that.
I'm not criticising, just
No.
trying to understand it. Okay, thank you for that. I've got another question about the recruitment strategy, do something big. I agree with the idea, and I support whatever's happening as much as I can. I think what my question is about, you're talking about taking recruitees to the university or a university. It could be the university bit of York College, it could be part of York St John, it could be part of University of York. Who knows, Askham Bryan might even take up franchise degrees, I don't know. But the training that's needed, first of all, as it stands, takes some time. Even if you think about from now until next September, that's barely enough time. And we're talking of people here who have got probably at least a level 2 or a level 3 qualification, or maybe you've got some teachers who you've got to convert to nursery supervision, because that will actually free up some sectors of the need. Could you amplify what you're saying about using a university to do this? I'm not doubting a university, I'm simply asking, how does it work?
So the working with the universities is to get people into the system. So it isn't the one size fits all at the minute. There is no magic wand to get in recruitment into the sector. And that is probably going back to the risk. That's probably the biggest risk to the places for next September. But that's something we are actioning and working with as many partners as we can to look at recruitment. We are working with DWP and looking at how we can kind of get them on board with looking at recruitment into the sector.
I understand that. I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, but I do think that this is an area where actually you can only make that transition relatively gradually. And the question is relatively gradually short enough for what we want, for what we need to happen to make this work? Okay, well, I'm not, unless you've got something more to say, I'm not encouraging you to, no, okay, thank you. And I think two things, bottom of page 46, I see we have a new ward. Should actually, I think, be Heworth without. And the last thing is we've got a statutory duty to secure sufficient high quality early years and childcare placements. I think the question is, have we assessed the number of children who would have SEND, who would be likely candidates for one of these provisions? And how does it work with the others? You've talked about 12 places across the city. I'm not arguing with that. You've got access to the figures. I'm worried that if the number of children with SEND actually grows, Martin's going to tell me it won't, but
I guess just to understand this is for that additionality, that's about young people with very complex needs.
Yeah.
So obviously all nurseries meet the needs of children with SEN and SEND. It's about additionality that currently we don't have any provision, do we, across the city, the SEND. So 12 places is 12 times what we've got currently. Actually, it's more than that.
I'm not diminishing the value of that at all.
Yep.
I'm trying to get a handle on our assessment of the figures. Barbara, you want to?
I just want to add to that. So when we say that we want to test the market, we need to see what we get back from potential providers around that specialist provision. And it should only be small to begin with, because we don't want it to run before it can walk. And the market is so immature in terms of that SEND after school provision. There's nobody else doing it in the country. And the DfE are very much looking to York to learn lessons from this. And if we test the market and there's nobody there, then we go back to the DfE and we say that the costs are prohibitive. But I think we've got to start very small and then we can build from there gradually.
So that's an area yet to be partly discovered and then revealed. Okay. Okay, I won't labour the send provision anymore. And in fact, for the moment, Subsidy Control Act. Now, my understanding of what that legislation is about almost industrial processes, certainly something at a much larger level than our city is likely to be envisaging. Could you amplify what's in the top paragraph, paragraph 28 on page 49? I mean, it relates to grant funding and whether that's actually, how can I put it, over the top, more funding than really should be provided. But those provisions seem to apply to me, to apply to larger projects, larger concerns.
Yeah.
Almost on a national basis.
We're very much guided by our legal team within the authority. And I think it's been complicated by the fact that we haven't had that clarity from the DfE. They've just said to be mindful of the Subsidy Control Act, where really they probably should have given us some clearer guidance with this programme. So we are erring on the side of caution with all of this, and we want to be as transparent as we possibly can be through the procurement process. But they're very much guided by legal on whether it does apply.
Okay, just that I had a quick look at the sort of general blether about the Act, and it just seems to me it's...
And there's lots of confusion. Every local authority seems to be doing it differently. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's it for my questions. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
I'm conscious of time. For Karen still to come on. Anything desperate you want to say to us before we let you go?
No, thank you.
Just one that you said that you want to come back and give us an update just for our planning. What would be a useful time for you to come back? Remember when you came last year, there was a lot of worry about it's turned out you've done a fantastic job dealing with all that worry. So how far down the line should we be hearing about things?
I wonder if we should come back in the summer term next year, because if the entitlement's going to double from September, then we'll be clear about what the plans are that are in place in preparation for that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What's this?
Do you want a time out? 2 hours. He's gone home. No, he said he's going home. Does people need a break? Are they happy to carry on? Those young fit chaps and ladies we have? We'll carry on because Karen's been waiting ages. Thank you very much. Oh, Martin's got.
Sorry, Chair. I just need to let you know I've probably got about 15 to 20 minutes and I do need to leave. It's we've gone beyond the time that we were expecting.
Over to you, Karen. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the invitation annually to come and present the Virtual School Head Teachers report. It's a little bit early in the year to have any kind of validated data, but you know, as a parent, as corporate parents, you absolutely want to know how the children have done with their education over the year. So with the caveat of that level of understanding that we have outcomes for our children, we can report to you on the work of the virtual school and the impact that we've had on those children and young people's outcomes, but none of the information is validated and we don't have national data for comparison. So it's very early, and actually the timing of being able to produce a report when some of the schools hadn't even got back to us and we're chasing down the last minute. But I'm really delighted that some of these outcomes are ready for you this early in the year. So very conscious of time, and I can see that, you know, councillors, you've all read all of the reports and papers in advance. I'm not proposing to go through huge amounts of detail for you, so that you do have the opportunity to ask questions. But the way I've structured this is with some key information for you, councillors, and then comments that just unpick and clarify and provide a bit of context around the difference between this year and last year, for example, and some key areas for you. So in terms of our cohort of statutory school age children and young people, it's quite important that, in line with our social care model of practice, the numbers are reducing. You know, and we had 187 children of statutory school age last academic year, and the year I'm reporting to you now, at the end of that year, 165. So we are seeing a reduction in our cohort size. That's not just in statutory school age, but early years, post-16, as it follows through. But really important as well to note that overall in the year, the virtual school is supporting a significant number of children greater than that 165, because of children coming into care, leaving care, and actually at times both coming in and straight out over the course of the academic year. So the cohort is very fluid at times, and that creates you know, challenge for our education partners and for our colleagues internally as well. Really delighted to report on school area, and the fact that we've got the majority of our children very locally. That's also an impact on the, you know, on our Together We Can teams, on our bringing children home. We are now seeing that our children are staying more locally, they're more connected with their families. We know that if children have got stable care, they will thrive in education because they're connected to key people. So that has helped. Interestingly, though, some of our, you know, we're working with more schools out of York than we are in York, even though what that means is, when children are not living in York foster care, they're in small pockets who require you know, so we haven't got large family groups. So I've got, you know, 46 schools in other local authorities with our children in care attending, and, you know, 32 schools in York of the 63. You know, we've got more children in those schools out of York, more York schools, but we've got most of our children in mainstream school. Really delighted about that. That's testament to the impact of our work on inclusion, the Learning Support Hub, our statutory SEN services. Very, very clear, and you'll hear from Maxine and Martin on the work that we're doing, that the SEN Code of Practice suggests that children are best supported in mainstream, and we work very hard to maintain that for our children, because it does lead to better outcomes. So school type is very positive, but really what is, and that's why we've got more children with alternative provision, because to maintain a place in mainstream when that's really tricky, we are having to negotiate and work with schools on, do we need a more flexible curriculum offer for those children and young people? And we have worked with quality assuring more alternative providers across the city, so that our children can access something that might meet their therapeutic needs alongside their learning. We are conscious that alternative provision is not the best offer it could be, and we would want our children to be accessing full-time classroom places to increase their life chances, but for some of our children in care, that's not possible. So we do have and track and monitor the alternative provision that schools are saying, you know, we can't manage unless we've got a day a week potentially of skills-based learning that helps that young person to re-engage with the classroom. So that is on the increase, and I would, you know, recommend that the committee want to hear about, is that rising, is that falling, how successful is that going forward. We work really hard to make sure that our children have school places. it's becoming increasingly challenging out of area. Our York schools are fantastic. Our York school admissions team are fantastic, but we do have struggles in that area. But then as well, we are seeing an increased number of children with special educational needs. 57% in the report, as you can see, of our children and young people in care have EHCPs or are on the special educational needs support register. However, I just jumped to the key stage 4 outcomes. They're the best we've had since I was virtual school head. I'm so proud of our children. You should be too, and of the schools. Our early years data is not as solid, but we actually have more children with special educational needs in the early year cohort than last year. Our phonics data is phenomenal. Schools are focusing on the right things. We're challenging them to, you know, let's get these children reading. If we can read, we can access the curriculum higher in our school career. Year 2 data, schools don't have to report it to the local authority, but they've all reported it to the virtual school, which is fantastic, because I did worry this year that schools would not report year 2 data because they don't have to. And then our key stage 2 data, when you look at the significant needs in that cohort, to have actually, it feels disappointing as a parent, you know, 4 out of 10 of our children didn't achieve this, but actually look at what we did achieve. Schools have worked really hard with us, but our GCSE outcomes, at the time of writing, 7 young people had achieved 5 GCSEs or more, including English and maths. This morning, I had a head teacher from the York school email me to say that they had requested a review of a GCSE maths grade for one of our year 11 pupils, and it's come back at a grade 4. So that's now 8 out of those children and young people. So that means only 1 young person achieved a grade 4 in English, but not in maths. And 8 young people got 5 level 2 GCSEs above grade 4, including their English and maths. That means for that 1 young person, they don't have to go to the resit lessons at York College. They don't have to. Their course that they've enrolled on is not a level 2 course, it's a level 3 course. It's phenomenal. So I'm really, I'm tingly about it. We did support a maths tutor for that young person. I emailed him, he emailed back and said, I'm really emotional now. You know, it's huge. So as parents, as corporate parents, we are really proud of the impact of our work. We're holding celebration events, graduation events for our children. We've already heard from Dan today, my colleague, around attendance. We are holding steady. You see the figures in here. There are dips, but and then it's not the best. But the cohort being smaller and the percentages not getting bigger gives me cause for encouragement. Those of you who are statisticians, actually, it doesn't look great, but it's better than it could be, and it's not getting worse. Sounds a bit woolly, but that's quite an achievement when the rest of the, when the rest of the country is struggling to maintain school attendance. The same for our suspensions and exclusions. The fact that actually we have prevented a significant number of suspensions, and what we've done is persuade schools to reduce tariff. And I'll give you a really fantastic example of joint safeguarding partnership work. A young person in year 11 at York High was, actually had a significant wobble, and the school contacted and said, we're going to issue a 5-day suspension. And I immediately emailed back and said, but don't ask this young person not to be on school site because we have concerns. And they agreed. Actually, no, we're not going to find another place for that young person. We're not going to ask them to stay in their foster care. We'll record a suspension, but we want them to come into school, and we'll support colleagues so that that young person is safe. So I think that we didn't get that kind of partnership historically. So that's another really positive, actually anecdote for you. Our PEP system, we will be re-tendering, but it is very well embedded, and our extended duties are embedded across the whole of the directorate. I wanted to capture the fact that all of our teams champion our children with social workers, and that cuts across our inclusion strategy, our graduated response to need, our attendance strategy and work, and the work of the virtual school. But we can take it further. And obviously our budget is not fantastic, but we do want to be thinking about actually appointing a lead for that extended duty so that we can make more of an impact on that area of work. So I'll thank you, committee.
Questions? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. I have to confess, I'd never heard of this until these papers were produced. I've been stuck in the place part of the council for so long. This is just a complete learning experience for me. And there's obviously some great work going on here, and I'm sure it comes with its challenges too. But could I just ask, for the children that go through this, what does that look like? Are they logging into Zoom and speaking with people, or are they doing e-learning courses? Or if I've just missed the point completely, can you just let me know what it's like for them on a sort of day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and then I'll be able to sort of better imagine it all.
You might have missed the point.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be gentle. I'm going to be gentle. So the children
just has to jump in. I promise he has heard of it before. He's just not been listening.
Stop. Our children in care, for whom the City of York is the corporate parent, are every local authority has to appoint a head teacher, if you like, to monitor their education and their attendance and their attainment and progress in school. So those children attend their own school, and I am your officer corporately who monitors how well they are doing and challenges schools to ensure that their education provision is appropriate, aspirational and responsive to their needs. So these are your children, because we look after them, but they don't log in and I don't deliver education to them. I challenge the schools on your behalf to do it for them, to do that.
Well, that makes complete sense now. I think the name just threw me slightly. Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you, and again, great work.
Questions? Go on, Cal.
Sorry. Excuse me. Thanks for the report, Aaron. It's the usual encouraging, strengths-based, positive report. And this is what a strengths-based report actually looks like. If you think that what you're reading in front of you is blowing the trumpet a bit high, actually, it's very accurate as far as these young people are concerned, and it doesn't diminish them in any way. And if you don't realise how much is happening to those young people in terms of being in a school where they necessarily don't feel at home, or where they're relying on somebody within the school to deal with the pastoral care side of things, then this sums up life for them, and it sums up that they can come out of it with something really positive. I'm sorry if I didn't, for me, every time I read this, I just wish so many other reports could be written on a strengths-based basis, because that's what underlines this. So my question about PEPs, the electronic PEPs, we've talked about this before, but it's the first time you said, I think, that the PEP software might need replacing, or are you saying that it's had so many years and we ought to think about whether there's anything better on the market?
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbertson. Your second point is that point. We can only award a contract for 3 years, so we are due to re-tender. That doesn't mean that our current provider won't be awarded the contract. but it actually takes a lot of time to do that with our procurement team, and make sure that we've got value for money and fit for purpose. So it's a forward plan. So it may lead to a saving. It may mean that we need to invest a little bit more, and we may change provider.
Okay, thank you. I was when you talked about alternative provision, I was wondering how many. I don't think I've read it in this report, but I could have done. How many children are working on AP? How many children in your virtual school are actually working on AP, or are they all school-based?
So every young person in the school type section has a mainstream school place or a special school, independent school, and none of them are on permanent alternative provision. But 29 of those children and young people from year 3 to year 11 are accessing some alternative provision alongside their mainstream school place. It's not legal for children under the age of 16 to only access alternative provision.
Right.
So that's why we monitor them, because they're unregistered with Ofsted. So we have our children and young people registered with our Ofsted registered provisions, and they may have half a day at the Joseph Rowntree farm. It might be that there's an alternative provider called Teach Me Happy. We have Ad Astra, which you'll probably have heard of. We've got Evolve, which is a sport provision. So some of our young people have a blended curriculum offer, and that number is 29. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I should have seen that. I didn't. Yeah, okay. I've got another. What's the question? I've got a comment here. Good work. I had one other question. It was your comment about skills-based learning. To what extent do the schools that we involve deliver any form of skills-based learning to our young people?
It does vary from school to school. Councillor Webb will back me up on this, that most of our secondary schools have a BTEC offer as well as a formal GCSE offer. And some of our young people are on access a day of skills-based learning, which is part of the outreach from the Danesgate community. So some of our looked after young people have Friday doing a day of construction for the next 2 years at the Danesgate community, but they're on roll at one of our mainstream schools. They will get BTEC qualification in construction to take forward into post-16. It hasn't disappeared, Councillor Cuthbertson, just because the DFE chooses to promote the EBAC and the more formal academic learning, because it's what's right for children.
I entirely agree. I'm sure Councillor Webb is going to contribute something here.
Looks like he is. I'll back you up, Councillor Cuthbertson. I also agree. Yeah, I think that obviously there is the new government has come in and is looking at curriculum in particular, and what that curriculum looks like. And I know that there is a review that's opening, if it's not already opened, where we can feed in from the council and schools, and everybody can feed in basically. And that's certainly something that I think that the curriculum has become so narrow that it is to the detriment of all young people, regardless of, you know, whether they're one of Karen's young people or anybody else. So I certainly will be making that point sort of as part of the council, and I'm hoping that we're going to put together a submission ourselves in order to further that aim. Thank you.
I'll support that.
Councillor Rose.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's a really well put together report. You've painted a really clear picture in that and in what you've said, and it's really positive. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. We should be proud of what we've accomplished here. Two very small points. One is the suspensions exclusions table doesn't have a total number of people on it. So it has the trend, so we can see that the total number of repeat suspensions is higher than previous years, but as a proportion, you can't see that easily. It obviously you can get those numbers from the rest of the report, but just one comment on that. The second one is there's a lot of stuff in here tracking our progress over time, but there's no benchmarking against national equivalents, etc. Obviously, I understand why that would be next to impossible to have something that's directly comparable, but could you give us a bit of a picture about roughly how we look compared to other local authorities?
So I had this conversation with Martin prior to this evening. National validated comparative data and regional data isn't published until after Christmas. What I could have put in, but I thought, in hindsight, I could have put last year's data in, but that was comparable to last year's results. It's really difficult at this time of year in October when we're still waiting for remark and reviews and only got one this morning. This could change. We could have some year 6 SATs data that changes. We're not likely to have, but we've got no national data yet around that and the region. So I've had a look on the softer, unvalidated data. But I did put it in like this time last year, and Councillor Waller and I had this conversation. It's like, actually, it's really difficult to know how to do this at this time of year. So I apologise for that, Councillor Rose. Perhaps you might want me to come back or just send you a report.
No apology needed. I guess, are we roughly median for the country? What's the general vibe?
We're brilliant.
We know our disadvantage gap is not good. Our children in care data year on year compared to national fluctuates because our cohort size is very small. I'm delighted with these personally, particularly the phonics. They're so strong, and our GCSE data when national comes out, because as you'll see in the context, some of our cohort weren't entered for GCSE because they were unaccompanied asylum seeking young people. So we had 22 in the cohort, but that cohort size compared to national eventually won't be that big. It's going to be great. But that's just anecdote. I can't. Thank you.
Martin.
So it will be, I think it will be important to come back with the sort of final report and certainly share it. But I guess like the earlier caveat, sometimes we're sort of looking at apples and pears. You know, the social work model of practice varies nationally because it's not a science, it's an art in many ways. And whether you rescue children, as I said earlier on, and bring lots of children into care, or whether you keep them at home and they don't become looked after, will vary massively, well, varies fairly significantly. The more and more we get towards looking after the right children, which are the most complex, means that in many ways our data may be affected in terms of going the wrong direction in this particular cohort. And the same with things like youth justice and various other bits. You know, if you're looking after the lowest proportion of children that you can bring into care, that you should, and the comparison may be that actually you're going to an authority that brings in far too many children that could have stayed at home. And it's a piece of work. Anybody who wanted to have some bedtime reading, there's a piece of work that Eileen Munro did into the death of baby Peter in her first and second report that went to government, and it talks about safe certainty and safe uncertainty, in the fact that you can be safe, you can have safe certainty by bringing lots of children into care. You'll be certain that they're all safe because you bring them into care. And safe uncertainty is about making sure that you can keep them within the family. There's always going to be a level of uncertainty about whether they're completely safe. So therefore, I'm trying to describe the different levels of practice that go into social work. That's why it's really difficult to compare one child with another in different authorities. But I think, like Karen, I think this really is worth celebrating, because I think some of the data in here, given the starting point for many young people, is phenomenal. We know that the care system, young people have had lots of difficult starts in life that impacts in all sorts of ways, but education we know that is certainly one of them. So we're never going to compare necessarily this group with young people that haven't come into care. But I think it's worth celebrating the achievement of all the young people in here.
I've just got one quick question. On the PIP PEP plan templates, you say it's bespoke to York, and you read them all, check the quality. Is the bespoke check to say that it's the right PEP each year? As in, who checks the report before it starts to be written? I know you're checking when they're finished, but is it still the right one for York? That makes sense.
Yeah, so to develop a personal education plan, there are some elements that are statutory in the Care Act that should be included in a young person's education plan. So that's our bare minimum.
Yeah.
But then our virtual school, our educational psychology service, and our schools and social workers and IROs say it would be helpful if. So each year we can tweak our template to make it flow based on feedback, to make sure that the young person's views are front and centre. And what we did last year was actually adopt the narrative writing and ask our designated teachers and social workers to complete the PEPs in first person narrative, addressing the address to the young person. That's still a work in progress, but some of the ones that have come through are absolutely phenomenal, respectful and personal. And those children and young people, if they want to access their records when they're 30, they will recognise themselves and not see somebody writing about them as if they're not real. So we really do. We're very passionate about making sure that we're aligning with the practice model, and we're challenging all our partners and stakeholders to put our young people at the centre of what they're doing. And I just close with what Martin always says to us: it's not good enough for my child, it's not good enough. These are our children, so it has to be good enough. So we're always trying to make it better. We're still on a journey, but yeah, it is personal.
It explains why it's so good. Thank you. Anything else, anybody? Martin's going. Thank you. Goodbye, Martin. Thank you, Karen. Much appreciated. Lots of report for everything else as well. Work plan. We're going to make a change because the next meeting in November, we have the free school meals pilot review, of which Council is very excited. He's got academics coming and everything. And we know it's an important part of what the council is doing. So I want to make sure that we're not sat here at 9 o'clock. It's only 8 o'clock. So the annual York Explore we're keeping on. And obviously we're going to add on thing about the update on the contract as well. But digital are happy to move to January. Reese caught them on his way in tonight, and so to give ourselves plenty of time to discuss, I think probably 2 quite interesting topics next month. And locality model, we'd already asked that to come on. It's only a short report, but we'd already asked that to be brought to that meeting. So I don't think we can ask them to, thanks for doing the effort of putting the report in, but now we're going to kick you in the long grass. So digital will move to January. The other ones obviously will have an extensive discussion about the progress on all of them. Is that okay, Councillor Webb?
Sorry to come in at this stage, but what is this locality model thing meant to be? Richard, and if you don't know, you might as well just admit it.
No, it came. Where did it come from, Richard? Told me earlier.
It came from last. It was last. The last meeting. It was suggested by Councillor Crawshaw, and
he wanted it. He's not here.
It was suggested by Pauline.
Yeah, an officer said this thing, whatever it is set to come through, and that there was some interplay between your committee and the EPAC committee. I mean, it's on YouTube. We can always revisit it, but it might just be worth checking.
It's only a short item. And
how do you know if you don't know what it is? Because I don't know what it is.
There's only one answer to one question.
Eh?
It was one small part of a question that Councillor Crawshaw put.
Right.
And if we move that, we end up again with in December or January, we just keep.
Well, we can't move that one because it was suggested that it would come here for feedback before it went to the executive.
There's a timeline in it.
Yeah, so I think given what the officer has just said, and I don't mean to be awkward, Chair. I'm only raising it because there's apparently a relationship with part of this and the committee that I chair, I think we could really do with officers giving me and you clarity on what this thing is, because when the officer at the last meeting raised it, she didn't just call it the locality model. She said something like community caretakers and the locality model, which is what pricked my ears up.
See, I didn't remember that bit.
It definitely was in that
Well,
conversation.
you would have been listening more than I'd have been listening to that bit then.
Well, I think we've both been listening to the same degree. I'd like to hope, but it's just worth getting some clarity.
Yeah.
Because
there was a reason why she wanted it in there.
Yeah.
Which is why Reece put it in. So
can I jump in? Just because I agree, I think both of you as chairs of the various scrutiny committees, yeah, makes sense for you to have sight of a report that was coming here in November in advance of that, so you're clear on what's going on. I mean, I also question whether that would be a short item, whether it was coming here or whether it was going to EPAT or whatever. Because, you know, it's quite an important thing. The basis is essentially looking at what services can be done in what parts of the city. So, for example, family hubs might form a part of that, where you have different family hubs in different parts of our community. How the GPs feed into that, because they're again based in different parts. And then, of course, it's in terms of the neighbourhood caretakers, it's thinking about, okay, how do we rearrange services so that actually different areas benefit from someone who knows that area and is focused on that area over a long period of time. That's kind of why it needs to come to scrutiny, though, to get people's feedback on it and get people's ideas about it. But yeah, potentially for this one, I think it certainly needs you guys as the chairs of those two committees to sit down and look at what is coming in November and think, okay, is that what we expected? Is that enough? Do we want to take it further after that? Or, you know, however we want to play it, really. But it probably needs more than just that week's notice, I imagine. And it might be worth contacting Councillor Crawshaw as well to follow up on the original question that he asked, if that's part of it as well. We'll leave it in for now.
Yeah, I mean, look,
we can figure it out.
I'll just send some emails. I mean, you know, it is the community caretakers bit that was linked to that has confused me. And you know, if some of it's going to place and some of it's coming here, or the housing one, it could get messy and vague and weird. So I think let's get our heads together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll leave it there.
TBC that item.
Yeah, as a kind of agenda item title, locality model doesn't really tell us much about what it is or why we're scrutinising it. I assume it's related to the communities.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I assumed from looking at it. It was related to communities, and then there was mention of family hubs, and actually it sounds like it covers every area of what the council does related to people and to place. So I agree, it's difficult to know how long that could possibly need on the agenda without knowing what it is or why we're scrutinising it. It sounds like quite a big
either be a short one or we'll maybe do a joint scrutiny.
Well, I can't say a lot on what it is because the officer isn't here, but I did check and it would be a separate report to what would come to EPAT. I think rather than it being a joint report, it would be separate information contained within it.
Maybe we can have a briefing with you outside the meeting, because I think you might know more than the chairs. No, forgive me joking. We'll pick it up outside the meeting.
If we can't put
but
detail,
it sounds very big, and it sounds like we could do with having a better idea of what it all is and where it should go. So otherwise, we'll end up having useless conversations.
If we can't produce detail 2 weeks before the meeting, then we'll leave it. But I think we've got to have some substance, more than just say getting it on the Friday before a Tuesday, so we can see specifically what we're discussing. If it's going to take up too long, because we already know we're going to be in there for a long time with the first two items. It's either going to be something quite straightforward and simple, just made aware of, and we can decide whether to discuss it. If it looks like a big discussion, we'll either put it into a joint one or we'll knock it down the road, as long as it can be discussed before it goes before executive. For the time being, just have to trust me and Callum to sort it. But we'll definitely be moving digital, and we'll keep the two in, and we'll add to York Explores about their contract negotiations and get where we need to from the council side. Councillor Rose, poised to speak.
It was just to say, can you include the health and housing?
Sounds like we need to
chair,
as well.
Just because my understanding from the council plan references to locality when it includes some wellbeing stuff. I think that's what Bob hinted at as well just then. So just making sure the right things come to the right place.
Chair, on that basis, if there could be political balance and therefore the chair of CCMC could be included.
It might be, yeah. There's something be sure to discuss there. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. If it's dragging in various places, we'll get. If it sounds like it is.
I saw what happened at the combined authority scrutiny.
We didn't. Cool,
Dark
right.
times. Oh,
What we said to move digital inclusion.
Digital inclusion has gone to January. Preschools is in there. York Explorer adding in the library contract with council contract with the update from the Explorer and the council. And no urgent business.
It was just a point on the website. I appreciate I'm not a standing member of the committee, so my input is less useful perhaps, but I just wanted to check two things. The first is the free school meal pilot year review. Is that just looking backwards or is that also looking forwards? Make sure, I think it's in the report, whichever way it goes on that one, but I just wanted to flag it for you. And then also the agenda items for consideration, the task and finish groups, etc., probably should end up on the agenda somewhere. So if that's a job offline, then that's fine by me, but I just thought I'd make sure that's not forgotten, that they should come back onto the agenda.
Yeah. We'll let Councillor Webb go because he might answer your question.
yeah, I think so. My understanding from talking to folks, and I've spoken to you already, Chair, about this, who've been the academics studying from York Uni and Uni of Leeds, that they will produce essentially 2 annexes to a cover report. They will be looking at the pilots that have gone so far. My intention is to basically sort of listen to what comes out of those reports. I've not seen them yet, and listen to questions, comments from the committee. And from there, that's going to inform what we do going forward. But it's important to remember that the York Hungry Minds campaign, of course, is run by a steering group that is separate to the council. So again, it'd be quite useful to, I can feed into that group thoughts and feelings from Scrutiny. Of course, there is the £100,000 that we've invested in Westfield. That is council money. Of course, that's going to be part of that scrutiny and see how that's being used. So that might inform future decisions about what we do with that funding. That's obviously guaranteed. We've guaranteed that for the remainder of I was going to say academic cycle, I mean municipal cycle. But yeah, so there will be certainly conversations, and we're happy to listen about what people's thoughts and feelings are, really. One point while I'm here is I've been told today that at least one of the groups wants to do a little presentation because they're academics, that's what they do. So might I just advise the room to maybe turn around so that you're at the other end, Chair, and stuff, so you can see the screen. It's always awkward when you have to look over your head. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. You mentioned task and finish. We have a task and finish group that doesn't seem to be going very far. It's the one on EHCPs. I'm not. I just think we should decide, since it's been sitting there for probably over 6 months now. Yeah, and I'm the only person from it. I'm the only person from it. I just thought I ought to mention it because of that. That's all.
Yeah, no, we're going to get in. But the difficulty is we have, and picking up Callum's point earlier, so Councillor Taylor's point, we have good reports, we have good questions, and then we end up saying 3 hours late and early, and we've got to squeeze. Well, I'll squeeze it in, but I've got to make sure we give it.
Yeah, it may not be possible to do it. I just think we should add that caveat.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
all do. Thank you. All happy. Let's go home. Meeting closed 8:15.
Thanks.